stretching. Now he's bringing back into shape.
Crash, bang, crack 'em up.
In about an hour, you can make lots of things that look awful and feel terrible.
Ever seen a toy so bizarre that it makes you question how it even got made? The 1970s were packed with some of the weirdest, wackiest, and occasionally dangerous toys ever created. From stretchable superheroes to crash-ready cars, these toys push the limits of fun and safety. Join us as we look at the 25 strangest 1970s toys you've never seen before. Ever seen an action figure with a pumping heart, breathing lungs, and a head that flips open? Meet Pulsar.
You can power his heart and lungs.
Expert test, no damage.
Mattel's 1976 answer to Kenner's $6 Million Man. This unique action figure featured a clear plastic chest that revealed internal organs, complete with a button on its back that made its heart pump and lungs breathe. It was weird, fascinating, and perhaps a bit unsettling. Pulsar officially hit stores in 1977, along with a Life Systems Center playset. But despite its flashy gimmicks, it didn't fly off the shelves. Mattel only produced one villain, Hypnos, before canceling the line in 1978. Turns out, kids preferred bionic superheroes over a figure with visible intestines. Today, Pulsar is a rare collector's item, with pristine versions fetching a small fortune. Ever wanted an action figure that stuck to walls like a mutant octopus? Our coming up toy is just for you. Released by Mattel in 1978, Sucker Man was easily one of the strangest action figures of the decade.
Sucker Man character comes in 3 colors, each sold separately, new from Mattel.
This stretchy, rubbery creature was covered in suction cups, letting kids stick it to walls and windows, or even throw it onto surfaces and watch it cling, like some alien experiment gone wrong. Unlike traditional figures with weapons or vehicles, Sucker Man's entire gimmick was sticking and unsticking. Despite its uniqueness, Sucker Man didn't last long. The novelty of watching it cling to surfaces wore off, and by the early 80s, it disappeared from toy shelves. Still, those who grew up with the toy remember its weird, eerie charm. Today, vintage Sucker Mans pop up in collectors' markets, proving that even the strangest toys can leave a lasting impression. In 1975, Kenner introduced Hugo, Man of 1,000 Faces, as a toy that was as fun as it was creepy.
Kit would come with mustaches and glasses and different wigs that you can put on them.
Designed by special effects artist Alan Ormsby, Hugo was a bald, expressionless doll with an unsettling stare. It came with a disguise kit, wigs, mustaches, scars, and fake noses, allowing kids to transform it into different characters. While some loved its creativity, others found Hugo's nightmare fuel. Despite its novelty, Hugo never became a hit. Parents found it unsettling, and compared to flashier action figures, its appeal was limited. Production quietly ended by the late 70s, but the toy remains a sought-after collector's item. Finding one with all accessories intact is rare, as the glue and disguise pieces dried out over time. Hugo's eerie legacy, however, remains stronger than ever. Clackers were one of the simplest yet most chaotic toys of the late 60s and early 70s.
They tested 17 makes in all shapes, colors, and sizes. But with so many of the balls disintegrating and flying about the room, this test turned out to be rather dangerous for the technicians.
The toy consisted of 2 hard spheres connected by a string. When swung correctly, they produced a loud, rhythmic clack-clack sound. Kids loved the challenge of getting them to knock together at high speeds, while adults found the noise unbearable. The first versions were made of tempered glass, which didn't always hold up to enthusiastic play. If hit too hard, clackers would shatter, sending dangerous shards flying. By the early 70s, injuries led to bans in several countries. Companies released safer plastic versions, but the original craze faded. Today, clackers are nostalgic curiosities, remembered for their loud, risky, and oddly satisfying gameplay. Who thought giving kids miniature spears to throw around was a good idea? Let's find out. Lawn darts, or jarts, were the ultimate mix of backyard fun and questionable decision-making.
A 4-year-old North Dakota child was killed while playing in a sandbox next to the lawn dart game.
Originally introduced in the 1950s, These oversized darts had sharp metal tips and were meant to be thrown in plastic rings on the ground. The problem? They were basically spears flying through the air. Kids loved them. Emergency rooms hated them. By the 1980s, the injuries were impossible to ignore. Thousands of kids were hospitalized, leading to an official ban in the United States in 1988 after a tragic fatality. Companies attempted a revival with plastic tips, but the original thrill was gone. Today, vintage jarts are collector's items, with some still remembering the rush and near misses that made lawn darts both exciting and terrifying. The lemon twist was one of the simplest yet most addictive toys of the 1970s.
Put the loop on your ankle, throw the lemon twist around with a hop and a jump as it clears the ground.
Released by Chemtoy in 1975, it featured a plastic lemon filled with rattling beads attached to a loop around your ankle. The goal was to swing the lemon in circles while hopping over it with your other foot. A mix of jump rope and coordination challenges. It was an absolute blast for kids. For parents, just another noisy toy clanking around the house. Unlike many fads that disappeared overnight, the lemon twist evolved. Newer versions like Skip It added counters to track rotations, making it feel more like a game. While you don't see the original much anymore, it remains a nostalgic piece of childhood for those who remember hopping, twisting, and occasionally tripping. Ooze It was one of the strangest toys in the 1970s. It looked like an alien with big round eyes and a stretched out mouth.
Yes, look at that! Oh my god, that's amazing! Oh, wow!
The real weird part was the thick green slime that oozed from its face when squeezed. The toy came with tiny plugs that covered its holes. Kids could pull them out and watch the goo slowly drip out like something from a horror movie. The slime was sticky and messy. It got everywhere. Parents hated it, but kids loved it. The more they squeezed, the more it leaked. Over time, the toy would dry out and crack, making it even weirder. People who had one still remember how strange and fun it was. Finding an original in good condition today is rare. Most were squeezed until they fell apart. Ooze It was gross, weird, and one of the most unforgettable toys of the decade. Next is a cool craft kit that lets kids dip wire into liquid plastic to make flowers. Dip-A-Flower kits brought a unique blend of art and science to crafting in the 1960s and 70s. These kits let kids and adults create artificial flowers by dipping wireframes into a colorful liquid plastic solution. The result? Delicate glass-like petals that hardened into vibrant, long-lasting blooms. It was a mesmerizing process, but it also came with a bit of risk. The chemicals used in early versions had strong fumes, making ventilation a must. Despite their popularity, Dip-A-Flower kits slowly faded from mainstream craft stores. Concerns about toxicity and the availability of materials played a role in their decline. However, the craft never truly disappeared. Safer modern versions still exist today, keeping the tradition alive. For those who grew up making them, Dip-A-Flower remains a nostalgic symbol of childhood creativity, proof that sometimes the simplest crafts can leave the biggest impact. Before Nerf guns took over, there was the Disco Punch, a toy gun that launched tiny plastic discs at surprising speeds. Emerging in the 70s, it was a part of a wave of projectile-based toys that leaned more towards excitement than safety. Kids loved the rapid-fire action, but parents, not so much. These flying discs had just enough force to sting on impact, making them a source of both fun and occasional sibling warfare. As the years passed, safety concerns led to softer alternatives like Nerf blasters.
Then have the last word with Secret Shot and let the secret out.
Which were far less likely to result in an unexpected eye patch. The Disco Punch quietly faded into toy history, becoming a collector's item rather than a backyard staple. While you won't find them in toy stores today, their legacy lives on as a quirky reminder of an era when toys weren't afraid to pack a little punch. Now, what toy combined mad science and third-degree burns in one package? Keep watching. Creepy Crawlers was one of the strangest and most exciting craft toys of the 1960s.
Now,
You can make all kinds of lovely things like these with Mattel's wonderful Thing Maker.
Released by Mattel in 1964, this kit lets kids create rubbery insects and creatures by pouring liquid plastic goop into metal molds. The real magic happened when they placed the molds onto an open-faced electric hot plate, baking the goo into squishy, wiggly critters. It was part toy, part science experiment, and all kinds of fun, unless you accidentally touched the scorching hot metal. By the late 1970s, concerns over burns and safety regulations led to the original version being discontinued. But the fun wasn't over. In 1992, Toymax brought it back with a safer, light bulb-powered heater. While it never reached the same heights of popularity, it remains a nostalgic favorite for collectors. If you ever played with one, you probably remember the thrill, and maybe a few singed fingers. Rock'em Sock'em Robots was the ultimate showdown between Red Rocker and Blue Bomber, letting kids battle it out in a mini boxing ring.
Press this lever. He throws a right, the other a left. Knock his block off. You're the winner.
Released in 1964 by Mark's Toys, this mechanical brawl featured robots throwing punches until one's head popped off. Simple? Yes. Satisfying? Absolutely. Parents may have raised eyebrows at the head-knocking action, but its robotic design kept it from feeling too violent. The game's popularity never really faded. Mattel revived it in 2000, and themed versions followed. Even decades later, there's something timeless about smashing buttons and delivering the ultimate knockout punch. Ever wanted to see the world without leaving your couch? That's where the Viewmaster came in. Invented in the 1930s, this little gadget lets people click through scenic views like the Grand Canyon.
Joey, look at my Viewmaster viewer! Friends, Rubbish Patch Kids in 3D! They're being kidnapped!
It was like a travel postcard, but way cooler. By the 1960s and 70s, it became a kid's favorite. Instead of landscapes, it featured cartoons, television shows, and movie scenes, a slideshow for your eyes. But here's the weird part. Early versions were made from heavy-duty plastic like Bakelite. That's right, this thing was built to last. Sadly, it couldn't compete with flashy new electronic toys. By the 1990s, video games took over, and Viewmaster lost its magic. Mattel bought it in 1997, turning it into a preschool toy. It's not the same, but hey, it certainly had a great run. Freaky cereal was one of the strangest breakfast brands of the 1970s, and its quirky collectible toys made it even more memorable.
We are the Freakies, and this is our Freaky Street. We never miss a meal, 'cause we love our cereal.
Created by Ralston Purina, the cereal came with small plastic figures of 7 oddball mascots: Boss Moss, Ham Hose, Gargle, Cow Mumble, Grumble, Goody Goody, and Snorkeldorf. Each character had its personality, tied into the cereal's bizarre mythology about a mystical Freakies tree where they lived. It was weird, it was colorful, and for a short time, kids were hooked. The fun didn't last long, though. Freaky cereal vanished from shelves in 1976, reportedly due to complaints about its taste and texture. While the cereal was briefly revived in the late 80s, it didn't recapture its former magic. Today, those little figures are rare collector's items, proving that sometimes even the strangest breakfast mascots can leave a lasting impression. The Spirograph was the perfect mix of art and engineering, allowing kids to create mesmerizing geometric patterns with nothing but gears and pens.
As well as with most standard pens, markers, and pencils.
The original sets featured plastic rings and tooth wheels that spun smoothly across the paper, forming hypnotic designs. But while the concept was brilliant, early versions lacked the safety features we see today. Pieces could slip, and kids often ended up poking themselves with the sharp metal-tip pens. Over time, manufacturers improved the design. Modern sets now include reusable putty to keep the gears in place, plus carrying cases to store everything neatly. Despite these updates, the classic Spirograph experience remains unchanged. Whether vintage or new, it still delivers the same satisfying blend of creativity and precision that's kept it popular for decades. Ever wondered how a simple game of digital ping pong kick-started an entire gaming revolution. Atari Pong changed home entertainment forever when it launched in 1972.
Super Pong. It's not just another video game. It's a real Atari.
Designed by Alan Alcorn, it brought the arcade experience into living rooms. Unlike modern consoles with endless accessories, Pong was refreshingly simple. It came with built-in paddles, a power supply, and a difficulty switch. No extra controllers, no cartridges, just pure electronic table tennis. At the time, the idea of playing video games at home was futuristic and a little strange. People were used to board games and outdoor activities, not bouncing a pixel across a screen. But Pong's success paved the way for gaming's future. While its accessories were minimal, vintage components like paddles and circuit boards are now prized by collectors. Pong's simplicity may seem primitive today, but it was the spark that ignited an entire industry. Introduced by Hasbro in the early 70s, these egg-shaped figures were designed to wobble but not fall over. Their slogan, "Weebles wobble, but they don't fall," became iconic. Why were they considered weird? Well, it was their unique design that allowed them to balance while appearing unstable. This quirky feature made them both fascinating and a bit odd compared to other toys of their time. As for why they stopped being made, their popularity waxed and waned over decades due to changing trends in children's play preferences. Tonka trucks weren't just toys, they were miniature tanks. Originally made by Mound Metalcraft in 1947, these sturdy vehicles were crafted from 20-gauge automotive steel.
What would happen if an elephant stepped on a Tonka toy?
Making them nearly indestructible. Unlike flimsy plastic or tin cars, Tonka trucks could survive years of rough play. Kids loved their realistic designs, complete with moving parts, while parents appreciated their durability. The only problem? Dropping one on your foot hurt. Over time, rising material cost and safety concerns led to changes. Steel tires were swapped for rubber, and plastic became more common. Despite these updates, Tonka trucks kept its reputation for durability. Now owned by Hasbro, they still dominate the toy aisle. But vintage, all-metal Tonkas remain prized by collectors as a reminder of when toys were built to last. Could a childhood classic double as a splinter-giving nightmare? Let's dig in. Lincoln Logs have been sparking creativity since 1916, when John Lloyd Wright introduced them to the world.
Lincoln Logs are just as much fun today as they were when you played with them, and they're still made of wood.
Made from sturdy redwood, these interlocking wooden pieces allowed kids to construct cabins, forts, and whatever else they imagined. But early versions had a bit of a rough edge. Literally. Some logs were prone to splinters, and sharp corners weren't exactly child-friendly. As safety standards evolved, so did Lincoln Logs. Modern sets now feature smoother wood and rounded edges, making them safer for younger builders. While vintage versions remain collector's items, today's models balance nostalgia with safety. Over a century later, Lincoln Logs continues to prove that sometimes the simplest toys have the greatest staying power. Hungry Hungry Hippos was introduced by Hasbro in 1978.
Hungry, hungry hippo! Open up and there it goes! It's a race! It's a chase! Hurry up and see their face! Who will win? No one knows!
This game was all about feeding marbles into hungry hippo mouths as fast as possible. What makes this toy weird? Well, it's frantic gameplay, where players frantically push levers to gobble marbles, creating a chaotic yet entertaining experience, unlike many of the other board games at that time. It didn't really stop being produced. Instead, new versions emerged over time with updated designs while maintaining its core fun factor. Its enduring popularity speaks volumes about how well-designed chaos can be timeless fun. Stretch Armstrong was one of the most bizarre and fascinating toys of the 1970s.
Stretching! Now he's springing back into shape. You can see inside him.
Launched by Kenner in 1976, this muscular action figure had a unique ability. It could stretch up to 4 times its original size and still snap back into place. Filled with a thick, gel-like substance, Stretch Armstrong wasn't just a toy. It was an experiment in just how far kids could push the limits of rubber and corn syrup. Despite occasional tears, often patched up with included bandages, Stretch Armstrong remained popular throughout the late 1970s. It disappeared for a while, but made a comeback in the 90s and again in the 2010s. Today, vintage models are prized by collectors, though modern versions still do exist. No matter the era, Stretch Armstrong remains the ultimate test of toy durability and childhood curiosity. So, how did a smooth rock in a box make one man a millionaire overnight? The pet rock was one of the strangest and most brilliant marketing stunts ever.
Now that I have my pet rock, I'm happy.
I have a reason to live. My pet rock won't burn to the ground.
Created by advertising executive Gary Dahl in 1975, it was exactly what it sounded like, a smooth rock packaged as a low-maintenance pet. Sold in a pet carrier-style box with air holes, it came with tongue-in-cheek instruction manuals on how to care for it. No feeding, no walks, just pure novelty. By the holiday season of 1975, over 1 million pet rocks had sold for $3.95 each. But as with all fads, the hype didn't last. By early 1976, sales plummeted and production stopped. Today, vintage pet rocks are collector's items and modern versions still exist. It remains a perfect example of how a simple, ridiculous idea, if marketed well, can become a cultural phenomenon. Smash-Up Derby was every kid's dream toy in the 1970s, if that dream involved sending cars flying into destruction.
And you can hoot and holler, cause you ain't seen nothing yet. Crash, bang, crack 'em up.
Released by Kenner as part of its Supersonic Power Line, or SSP, the set featured two vehicles designed to crash into each other. Unlike typical toy cars that simply rolled away after impact, these would explode. Doors, hoods, and wheels flying everywhere. It was pure chaos, and kids loved it. Parents, however, weren't always thrilled with car parts scattered across the house. As toy trends shifted towards safer play, Smash-Up Derby eventually disappeared from shelves. Today, vintage sets are highly sought after by collectors, proving that sometimes the most reckless ideas make for the most memorable toys. The original may be gone, but the thrill of crashing and smashing still lives on in nostalgia-fueled memories. Would you let your kid bake rubbery monsters in a 400-degree metal oven? The Thing Maker was every crafty kid's dream and every parent's safety nightmare.
Thing Maker 2. In about an hour, you can make lots of things that look awful and feel terrible.
Released by Mattel in 1964, this toy lets children create rubbery bugs, monsters, and even flowers by pouring liquid plastic goop into metal molds. The catch? You had to bake them in a hot plate oven that reached nearly 400 degrees Fahrenheit. It was part science experiment, part do-it-yourself horror show, and completely thrilling for kids who loved making their squishy creatures. Despite its popularity, safety concerns led to its discontinuation in the early 1970s. Burn risks and chemical fumes made it a little too intense for modern standards. Mattel tried reviving it over the years, including a 3D printed version in 2016, but nothing quite captured the magic of the original. Today, vintage thing makers are treasured by collectors, reminding us of a time when toys were a little more daring and a lot more hands-on. Melody Mike was one of the quirkiest musical toys of the 1970s. Unlike a typical children's piano, this one was built inside the head of an orange, Muppet-like character. Kids could press its built-in keys to play tunes, making it part instrument, part bizarre talking toy. Despite its charm, Melody Mike didn't last long. As electric keyboards and more advanced musical toys became popular, simpler designs like this faded away. Today, vintage Melody Mikes are rare, cherished by collectors who appreciate their weird and wonderful design. Next up, we have the Lazy Daisy doll. Why did this sleepy, falling over doll creep some kids out? The Lazy Daisy doll was one of the more unusual dolls from the early 1970s. Produced by Ideal Toys in 1972 and 1973, it had a canister-style body that made it tilt and fall over as if constantly dozing off. This sleepy, relaxed look made it a quirky alternative to traditional dolls. After just 2 years, production stopped, likely due to limited appeal. Some kids found her endearing, but others preferred dolls with more traditional poses. Today, vintage Lazy Daisy dolls are rare collector's items, remembered fondly by those who once had this peculiar, always sleepy companion.